Hello children, this is Grandma Carla and this is Skylark by Patricia McLachlan and we are on chapter 13. More letters came from Papa. The dogs missed us. Papa missed us. All our days were long days filled with green all around us and the sea. The rain should have made us happy, but it didn't. It made us think about Papa. Even Caleb looks sad now. One day, Sarah showed him the woolly ragwort that grew in Maine, but it didn't make Caleb laugh the way it used to. At night, Caleb had bad dreams. I could hear him, and I could hear Sarah singing him back to sleep. Sarah wrote letters to Papa every day. At night, she read his letters over and over again, the light from the oil lamp spilling into the hallway. Dear Anna and Caleb and Sarah, somehow it isn't so hot now. The nights are cooler, and the dogs are sleeping in my room again. Sometimes Lottie tries to climb up in the bed. I love you all. Jacob. And then one day at dinner, Caleb said something that made my heart skip. It's almost time for school, he said. Fall is almost here. The air is cool and crisp. In the mornings, as if fall would come soon. I had hardly thought about school and fall. My thoughts were about summer and Papa and the sweet smell of the prairie grass. The aunts looked at Sarah, then at Caleb, then at me. Would you like to visit the school here, Caleb? Said Aunt Harriet. It's a wonderful school, Caleb, said Sarah slowly. She sighed. I went to school there. Caleb stood up and looked at us. Very carefully, he pushed in his chair. No, he said, I don't want to go to school here. I like you, but I don't want to live here. Caleb walked to the door, opened it. I want to go home, he said in a soft voice. He looked at Sarah. Don't you? He asked. Don't you want to go home, Sarah? And then he left. It was quiet. I stared at my plate of food. I could feel Aunt Mattie beside me, fiddling with her fork. Aunt Harriet cleared her throat. When I looked up again, Sarah was staring out the window at the sea. No one spoke. I looked everywhere for Caleb. Behind the house, in the wooden rowboat, on the rocks where the seals sunned. I found him huddled by a driftwood log in the cove, and Caleb was crying. I sat down next to him, and I listened to the waves come in. A wind came up, and I put my arms around him. Don't cry, Caleb, I said. Please don't cry. After a moment, Caleb looked up at me. I could see his eyes shining in the moonlight. I thought of Papa's eyes shining when the barn burned. Anna, said Caleb, his voice soft, will we ever see Papa again? Ever? Caleb waited for me to answer, but I couldn't find any words for him. He began to cry again, and we sat there as clouds moved across the moon, dark, then light, then dark again, and Caleb fell asleep. And this is Grandma Carla, and I love you. Hello children, this is Grandma Carla, and this is Skylark by Patricia McLachlan. This is chapter 14. We only have 2 chapters left. The August sun rose red, then turned gold. It touched the flowers of the ants' gardens, the beds of late roses, the nasturtiums and the asters. Geese flew in, sitting calmly on the water. A boat with 2 masts and a tall sail slipped by. Caleb went fishing with William and came home with 2 fish. Flounder, said William, smiling at us, but Caleb didn't smile. In the afternoon, we walked by the water, Aunt Lou and Sarah and Caleb and I. Caleb threw sticks for Brutus, who brought them back along with big rocks and seaweed and whatever else came up with the tide. We began to walk up the path again, Caleb carrying sticks, Sarah stopping to pick a hatful of rose hips. A fisherman pulled up lobster pots in the cove, and then suddenly Caleb straightened and looked past me to the top of the hill. He didn't speak, but his lips moved. What? I asked him, and I turned to see a figure standing there, looking out at the sea. Caleb's mouth opened, and he dropped all his sticks. "Papa!" I leaned closer to hear him, and then he shouted, "Papa! Papa!" He began running up the hill, calling Papa's name over and over, and I saw Papa turn at the sound of Caleb's voice. I ran too, Sarah running behind me, and I began to cry. "Papa!" Caleb ran into Papa's arms, and Papa held him close. Papa picked me up too, and my hat fell off, and I buried my face in his neck. Papa looked at Sarah. "It rained," he said. He smiled at her. "I never thought you'd come," whispered Sarah. "It rained," Papa said again, his voice so soft that it could have been the wind that I heard. Caleb sat on Papa's lap. "And there were fireworks, Papa, and lots of them. How big are the kittens?" "Big, like you," said Papa, smiling. He touched Caleb's face. "Restless, like you." "Do you want to eat something, Jacob?" asked Aunt Harriet. "Harriet's solution to the problems of the world," said Aunt Lou, making Papa smile. "No, thank you," said Papa. "I couldn't eat." Caleb slid off Papa's lap. Papa stood, looking out over the water. No one spoke. "That sound," Papa whispered after a moment. "The sea," said Sarah. Papa turned to look at her. She touched his arm and walked off down the path to the water. Papa looked at Caleb and me quickly, and then he followed her. Caleb started to walk after Papa, but I reached out and I took his hand. "Caleb," I said softly. "Where are they going?" Caleb asked. "They'll come back," I said. "It's all right, Caleb." Caleb and I stood and watched Sarah and Papa walk down the hill. They stopped. They talked. And then, after a moment, Papa put his arms around Sarah. I smiled. "It's all right," I whispered to Caleb. That night, after Aunt Harriet and Aunt Lou had played music for Papa and Aunt Mattie had danced, we walked down by the water, and then Sarah and Papa told us that in the spring we would have a new baby. "A real baby?" asked Caleb, excited. "A real baby," said Papa. "Our baby," said Caleb, smiling. Sarah saw my face, and I knew, and she knew I was worried because Mama had died when Caleb was born. "It will be fine," she told me. "I am healthy. The baby's healthy. The doctor said so." I looked at Papa. "It will be fine, Anna," he said. Clouds passed, and the full moon spread out over the water. Papa put his arms around me. "It will be fine, and it will be wonderful," he said. This is Grandma Carla, and I love you. Hello, children. This is Grandma Carla with the last chapter of Skylark by Patricia McLachlan. Chapter 15. "I see the house," cried Caleb, standing up in the wagon, "and the new barn." The wagon passed the cornfield, still dry, but we could see some green in the meadow. We turned into our yard, and Nick and Lottie ran and jumped up into the wagon before it stopped. "Nick, Lottie," I laughed as they jumped on us, licking our faces. "There's some water in the pond," said Papa. He looked at Caleb and me. "And there are kittens waiting for you on the porch." Caleb and I ran to the porch where Seal washed her 4 kittens, 3 gray and 1 orange like Maggie's cat, Sam. Someone had left a bowl of water nearby. "Look, Sarah." Caleb held the orange cat for Sarah to see. She smiled at us. And then she and Papa began to walk out to the fields to see the green. I watched them, Papa dressed in his wedding suit and Sarah in her yellow bonnet. And then Sarah bent down suddenly. Her traveling coat spread out behind her. She picked up a stick and she began to write in the dry earth. "What is she doing?" asked Caleb. I knew, but I didn't say anything. Papa turned and walked back to her, looking down at what she had written. She smiled up at him, and the two of them walked out into the fields in the late pale light of afternoon. Papa reached out and took Sarah's hand. Caleb and I walked down the steps. Under the post, where Caleb's glass still stood,
Sarah had written one word in the prairie dirt. Sarah.
Home. It has rained twice, but there is still dust. The corn still rattles in the wind. The green of Maine seems to be only a dream. When we came home by train, we passed trees and hills and lakes filled with water. They are beautiful, the trees and the hills and the lakes filled with water, but the prairie is home. The sky so big it takes your breath away. The land like a giant quilt tossed out. It will rain again. There is some water in the pond, not enough for swimming, but there will be. There will be flowers in the spring, and the river will run again. And in the spring, there will be the new baby, Papa and Sarah's baby. Caleb, like Papa, is not always good with words, but I think Caleb says it best. Our baby. That is the end of Skylark, and although the book makes me cry, I really, really enjoy it. I hope you've enjoyed it too, and we'll pick up a new one. I found that there's other books to this series, and so I will be bringing them home and reading them as well. This is Grandma Carla, and I love you.